Hey everyone, this is Ira Nicodemus, founder and CEO of Propsy and Propsy.com, where we provide comprehensive resources for homeowners, including a full annual maintenance plan. I encourage you to go check that out at Propsy.com. We are here talking today the third part of a four-part series we're doing on how to choose the best electric plan for your home. In part one, we gave kind of an overview of the plans. Part two, we talked about how to find your consumption for by month. This is part three, where we're talking about time of use plans. And then our fourth and final, we'll talk about how to find different plans and then compare them. So what is a time of use plan, and is it right for you? So a little bit of understanding about this. So a few years ago, the utility started going to what they called smart meters. And prior to having smart meters, they would have someone come by and they would simply be able to read what your consumption was. So they said, I read it on the 1st, I read it on the 31st. The difference between those is the consumption. So an analogy to this would be if you were to drive 100 miles and we say, we know we started from here and he finished here, but throughout that period, we don't know what you did. We don't really know how fast you drove at different times. We don't know if you stopped for lunch. All we know is that you drove 100 miles and maybe we're charging you based on that. Well, with the advent of smart meters, which are networked in, they give much more granular data to where you're able to see the time throughout each hour of the day. So it's really, most of the time, it's down to 15-minute increments. So you can really start to get an idea of how much is being used at different times of the day. Well, why is this important? So if you remember back, we'll use another analogy. Several years ago, they had what they called the free nights and weekends on cell phone plans. And you probably remember this, and the idea was that they already had all this infrastructure in place. They had towers and everything that they needed to support it, and the majority of people were using their cell phones during the business hours. So they're using them for work, and it would really bog down the infrastructure. So rather than having to add more, what they wanted to do is try to incentivize people to take and shift some of that usage, that demand, off of the peak hours to off-peak. So they have all the capacity there, let's just use it in the nights and weekends, so they give people that ability to do that for free. Well, what happens there is a very similar thing with the electricity markets. Now that they're able to see when people are using their power, they can start to bill them in a way that incentivizes them to shift it off. Now, why would they want to do this? In most markets, we're here in Texas with Propsy, and this is definitely a hot market. So the peak periods for our electricity grid are during the summer, Monday through Friday, weekday afternoons. And this is when all the air conditioning is on, it's the hottest time of the day, and everything's just going full bore. Well, if it's not one of those times, we still have all those generators and all the wires and transmission and distribution infrastructure that's there that needs to be in place. So what happens is, because they need to have enough capacity for those periods, but they don't actually use it that much, they would rather get people to shift some of that load off to the off-peak hours rather than having to build additional capacity generators, et cetera, that really aren't going to be used that often. So what happens is they now start to charge free nights and weekends, or some version of that. Maybe it's a discounted half price every week during the evenings. Maybe it's just on Saturdays or something like that. There's different plans, which we'll talk about again in part 4. So what happens there is that if you maybe have a free weekend, you can now run your electric clothes dryer on the weekend instead of during 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, which helps the grid overall, but now you get to do that for free and it can bring your price down. So these sound like a great thing, but they aren't necessarily for everyone. The key to understanding these, the simplest way to think about it is, how do you use your home and what is your usage pattern like throughout the day and throughout the week? Now we could go into the detail here of the Excel data, and with the smartmetertexas.com website, or if you have something similar in your state to access your smart meter data, you may be able to do this level of analysis, but it's a fairly manual process. You'll need to export data on increments of 15 minutes. You'll be able to have to really kind of work through it and then compare it to the rate plans. It's a very difficult thing to do. So the easier way is to just think, how do you use your home? Let's say, for example, you are a professional who is away from the house all day long, Monday through Friday. You work long hours, you leave at 7 in the morning, maybe come home at 7 at night. The weekends, you like to get out and do things. You're not home a lot even then. So pretty much the only real usage you have is, let's say, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. In that case, it may be a really good opportunity for you to go to a time of use plan. Now, contrast that with someone who maybe works from home. If they work from home, or maybe it's a stay-at-home mom who has the kids at home during the day, or whatever the case may be, if you look at that situation, their usage profile throughout the day is going to be even more because they're there and they're running the AC during the hot time of the day, or the heat if it's in a electric heating in the winter. So it wouldn't make as much sense for them to be incentivized to be on one of these reduced cost nights and or weekend plans. Now you might say, well, what's the harm of just going on one of those because it's going to be free anyway, right? If you remember back to the first video that we did, we talked about kind of how this works, and the retailers will contract different chunks of power and then retail those out to the consumer. Typically, the plans that have the reduced evenings and weekends rates, the time of use plans, are not going to be the lowest cost option during the day as well, right? So they're making that up during the daytime cost if they're giving the reduced evening cost. That means that if you're like most people and you use more power throughout the day rather than in the evenings and weekends, you could actually end up paying a lot more overall because that power using at night wasn't that much anyway. So it might make more sense for you to just go on a traditional plan. So time of use plans can be really good. They sound like a good thing. The key is that you have to understand your usage habits. Most of the time we find that it is lower overall cost to simply stay on a traditional plan, but that isn't the case for everyone. So we'd encourage you to look at those, and if we have more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and we will look at a couple examples of the traditional plans in part 4 up here next.